Hello everybody, I'm standing on a lovely beach on Mauritius, on the southwest coast of Mauritius, a place called Black River, and just finishing a lovely 6-day holiday on Mauritius. And we just had beforehand, we had a 5 days on the nearby island of La Réunion, which is that way. I just finished doing another video which I'll post specifically about La Réunion, which is a very, very interesting island of its own. And this video is about comparing Mauritius with La Réunion. I'm not doing a video on Mauritius itself. Mauritius is a well-traveled place, pretty touristy in fact, but because not very many people outside of at least the French-speaking world have visited La Réunion, and certainly not many people that I'm aware of have visited both Mauritius and La Réunion, I thought I'd do a little comparative video because the islands are very close together. They're part of the same island group, and there's some similarities, but really they're very, very quite different. So let's get into it, shall we? All right, so La Réunion and Mauritius are neighboring islands. They're only 30 minutes apart by flight. They're both part of the Mascarene Island Archipelago, which contains, those are the two main islands of the Mascarenes. There are a few smaller ones, and we are east 400 to, I don't know, 700 or 800 kilometers east, depending on the island, from Madagascar in the Tropic of Capricorn. So we're well within the tropics. Réunion is 290 or something kilometers exactly to the west of where I'm standing here, over my left shoulder, if you like. And then beyond Réunion is Madagascar. Both of the islands are volcanic, but Réunion is much newer. So Mauritius, and they're both similar size. La Réunion is 2,500 to 2,600 square kilometers. So if you're from the UK, that's like the size of Oxfordshire. If you're from the US, that's like a little more than half of the smallest state of Rhode Island. So it's not small. I mean, not big. Réunion is about 70 kilometers by 70 kilometers. It's more or less round. And Mauritius is a similar size. It's 20% smaller, also basically round. They have broadly similar populations, but the topographies are completely different. So that makes the feeling on the two islands different. So starting with La Réunion, La Réunion is new. Geologically speaking, it's this verdant, unbelievable green, jungly gem of an island with an active volcano on it, and mountains rising up to more than 3,000 meters. Treacherous topography, just dripping green with palms and lush vegetation, something like you could imagine they'd filmed Jurassic Park or another similar sort of film there. And the population is therefore based mostly on the coast, because the inland is hard to get to. Although there are villages and things in the inland, up in the old calderas, which is very interesting indeed. So its population of about 900,000 people is really hugging the coastline quite much, and so it feels fairly crowded in the populous area. So when you're in La Réunion, it feels pretty crowded with traffic and people, because those 900,000 people within the 2,500 square kilometers are really on the coast. Mauritius, on the other hand, is less dramatic. They do have interesting, nice mountains and some things much less dramatic. It's a much older island. Population is sort of urban. They have one sort of big, quote, metropolitan area, that's Port Louis, which kind of sprawls around and up and down the coast. So on the sort of western 2/3 of the island, it's fairly populous. It's not particularly hugging the coast necessarily. The island is, because it's less mountainous, it has sort of roads crossing in all directions. There aren't really that many areas on Mauritius that are inaccessible. There's the Black River Gorge, but even there's roads through it. So it's pretty much, the population is bigger. It's 1.2 million on an island which is 20% smaller. So it's also very crowded feeling. And one of the first differences that you would notice as a tourist is that Réunion has very few beaches. Réunion is a volcanic island. Most of the coastline is black rock, dangerous, sharp black rock. They only have a few beaches, and those beaches aren't really your classic white sand beaches like you'd find in other tourist destinations in the Indian Ocean. And that, by the way, is perhaps one of the reasons why La Réunion is less well traveled outside of, other than by French people, or even including French people. Mauritius is a famous, a well-known island ringed by wonderful sand beaches all the way around, coral reefs and everything. It's more of a tropical paradise. A little asterisk on that, which I'll come back to, however. Now, what's similar? Both islands are fundamentally French-speaking islands. Both islands are... Je fais une petite vidéo. Je fais une petite vidéo avec mon caméra. Merci. I just needed to explain to the person in front of their house what I'm doing. She was wondering why I was standing here facing her house and talking to nothing. Anyway, both La Réunion and Mauritius had periods of French colonization. La Réunion was has always been French. Both islands were found by peoples uninhabited. Mauritius was found first by Arabs, and La Réunion was found first by Europeans, by French, and in both cases the islands were uninhabited at that time. And in both cases they were colonized by Europeans, slaves were brought from Africa, and then other indentured servants were brought from India primarily, and also from China and other places. That's what both islands have in common, and they both had a long period of French colonization. Réunion, like I said, was always French, and that means that both islands, French is the main is the lingua franca among the people. So on La Réunion, it's standard French, and the people speak a local French, Creole French, or kind of a French dialect amongst each other. On Mauritius, they also speak French, Creole French with each other on the street, but English is much more prevalent because English is, well, they were a British colony after being a French colony, and right up until independence in the 1960s, they were a British colony. So English is much more prevalent here. Most people are bilingual. They speak French with each other, I've observed, but they're more than prepared to speak English with visitors, with tourists. And signs and so on in Mauritius, there's sort of a bilinguality in Mauritius. The signs are typically in English in terms of road signs and advertisements, billboards and so on, mostly in English. But people are speaking French with each other mostly. So sort of stratification of the language, I suppose, like they have in Luxembourg, where the different languages are used for different reasons. So French on the ground level, if you like, among the local people, and then either French or English. English predominantly, I think, at the sort of more formal levels of society. Saying that, in both islands, traditional Indian languages are spoken by people of those heritages, or even Chinese. So there's a lot of different cultures going on and mixing here on Mauritius and also in La Réunion. Whereby in La Réunion it's more sort of the French, formal official French thing has sort of permutated more sort of deeper in, and so you see less evidence of Indian languages and Chinese in La Réunion, even if it's being spoken by some people at home. Here in Mauritius you see lots of Indians, you see lots of Hindi and other Indian languages written on signs and so on. In fact, we just were here for a major Indian festival by chance, and we got to see the Indian population. So Mauritius is predominantly Indian, I believe, in terms of its, it's 49% Indian. So the other races, which are Black African, White European, and Chinese and others, are compressed into the other roughly 50%. But one has an overall feeling that it's a very Indian-feeling island. And the food also has a sort of an Indian kind of aspect to it. Curry seems quite common, samosas and things like that. So it's Indian culture has definitely very much influenced the island. Mauritius is a left-hand driving island in the British style, because it was a British colony. Even if the road signage and so on is of the UK, sorry. People drive on the left, and the road signage is all sort of British looking and feeling, so it's kind of got a British driving culture, even if people are speaking French, which I found interesting, and I found myself wondering if there's anywhere else in the world that drives on the left and speaks French as a language. Maybe somebody out there knows. Whereas La Réunion is, it feels obviously in all respects very French. La Réunion, very topographic, very dramatic topography, not many beaches. Mauritius, it's the other way around. It's a bit flatter. It's got some rolling mountains. It also has sand beaches surrounding the island, with resorts all around. Mauritius has a sort of fairly big capital city called Port Louis, and its surrounding metropolitan areas. I know there are different communes and so on, but it feels like there's a kind of a big city on Mauritius, whereas La Réunion doesn't really have that. Saint-Denis is the main town, but the population actually seems spread more around. The food in La Réunion, you either have French food or international food, or you have the La Réunion cuisine, which is a delicious cuisine all of its own. Kind of curries and richly spiced and aromatic types of dishes with chicken and fish and sausage, and they call it curry, and it's served with rice and lentils, and that sort of sits alongside. They call it Creole food in La Réunion. Mauritius seems to have also lots of Western food, probably because of the foreigners that are here, but lots of Indian food. We haven't yet seen a lot of what I would call Mauritian Creole food. I'm sure it must exist. We have had a few things. They've got vanilla chicken. We've had chicken and prawn curry with lentils and rice. So there are a few things, and those things seem similar to La Réunion. But whereas in La Réunion, you either go to a Creole restaurant or you go to a Western or international restaurant, here in Mauritius, it seems like the vast majority of restaurants are something like Indian or Chinese or Italian or whatever. I have not seen a single restaurant that describes itself as a Mauritian Creole. No, I tell a lie. There was a Mauritian Creole restaurant in the Black River Gorge. I tell a lie. We went to that, and we had chicken and crevette curry. So yes, there is, but it's not the predominant form. When you're in Mauritius, you hear all sorts of languages from the tourists. You hear French, you hear English, you hear Chinese, you hear whatever. It's a very well established tourist island with lots of direct flights from mainland Europe, whereas La Réunion is connected mostly, if not entirely, from France, other than local flights from the region. If you're coming from Europe, I believe, to get to La Réunion, if you want to fly nonstop, you have to fly one of the French airlines, French carriers, and you have to start from a French airport. The standard of living, La Réunion is a department of France, which means it has formal status as a French state, very much like Hawaii does to the United States. It's completely politically indistinguishable from the rest of France, and it has a French-style infrastructure, French quality of infrastructure. Everything about it feels French. The cars driving around, the roads, the signs, everything feels very French. Indeed, better off even than some regions of France that we know of on the mainland, some regions of mainland France that we know of. Definitely first world kind of situation. Doesn't mean there aren't villages with poorer people. Of course there are, but it feels definitely more of a first world situation. Mauritius is also a pretty well developed country, and I think it's been classified by the World Bank as a high income country. And there's lots of well-offness here, lots of good infrastructure is similarly good, generally speaking, the roads and so on. But it also has definitely sort of a certain characteristic or feeling of being a developing country as well. There are definitely rural areas on Mauritius, in the sugarcane area, plantation areas where, yeah, you feel like it's more similar to being in, what am I going to compare it to? Like on a Caribbean island, I would say, if anybody's ever been there, more of a developing kind of a feel. Not everybody driving around in a car, lots of buses and so on. And then in town, it does feel modern with modern cars and well-off people and office buildings and so on. So Mauritius feels a little bit more developing as a whole, but having two strata, kind of a well-off stratum and then a kind of a more developing stratum. And from a cost perspective, La Réunion is by no means a cheap or bargain destination. The prices are similar to mainland France, maybe about 10% more. Mauritius is definitely cheaper in terms of meals and so on, are definitely less expensive than they are in Europe if you go to sort of more local restaurants and so on. The dodo bird is from Mauritius, or was here before going extinct. Ironically, the main beer in La Réunion is called Dodo, even though they never had a dodo bird. So I kind of stole that one, whereas the main beer here is called Phoenix. They're both okay, but Dodo and La Réunion gets my vote as being the better beer. Both the Mauritius has fruit bats, which are giant, or flying foxes, which are giant, really, truly huge bats that fly around in the day. We're standing in the supermarket parking lot today, and two giant fruit bats, fruit foxes, just loping overhead, just flying overhead. It was late in the middle of the afternoon. Because they're eating fruit, they're not looking for insects with sonar location. So that's something interesting and quite exotic. And in Mauritius, there's whereas La Réunion is known for hiking and lots of inland kind of things to do, Mauritius is definitely known for the beaches and snorkeling and so on. I haven't seen any advertisements for inland things to do, like any kind of adventuring, or there's the Black River Gorge, and you can go hiking there, and I read about it, but it doesn't seem like that popular of an activity. Everybody's on the beach here, more or less. Now, just one last point about that. We have had the luxury of going to lots of interesting tropical destinations around the world, Kathy and I, over the years, including in the Indian Ocean, including in the Pacific and in the Caribbean and so on. And I would say Mauritius is really right up there at the top in terms of the quality of the beaches and the sort of the general tropical beach vibe, if that's what you're after in terms of the weather, nice humid tropical weather, nice sand beaches, nice warm, very, very warm water. Nevertheless, the snorkeling has been a disappointment. The snorkeling here is not nearly as good as what we've had in some other places, and below average, I would say. And partly that's probably because, even though the island is surrounded by coral almost completely, that's partly because of coral damage, I guess. And they have had some recent typhoons which they say have damaged it, but the variety of fish just isn't quite the same. The coral is in really bad shape, unfortunately. Obviously, global warming is affecting that everywhere, but it seems to have affected here. So don't come to Mauritius if you want to snorkel. Don't know about diving. If you're going to dive, it's going to be offshore. You're going to have to take a boat. Do come to Mauritius if you want to just relax on the beach and have some nice food, nice, warm, hospitable people, and modernities if that's what you want. At the same time, there's lots of local feeling, local atmosphere, local culture, which is very strong and vibrant here on Mauritius. Do go to La Réunion if you want. Again, some of the most dramatic scenery you've ever seen. Are interested in hiking, you want to see an active volcano, you want to see the bizarrity of a piece of mainland France in the tropics in the southern hemisphere. I just couldn't get my head around that the whole time. Do go to La Réunion if you want great food. I think the food there in La Réunion, on balance, is better. And do go to La Réunion if you want just something really different that isn't like some place that a lot of people have been, tropical, but also quite different. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a feeling of the difference between La Réunion and Mauritius, two of the Mascarene Islands east of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. Thank you.